Thundergrunt.
Hey guys!
Bob!
I thought we would just go quiet and see how long it would take. I guess you just barrel on. Hey,
Just
Bob.
make it awkward as hell. Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. Today we are going to talk about, it's an anniversary, isn't it?
20th.
20th anniversary. We're going to talk about the comedy Legally Blonde. But before we do that, we're going to introduce ourselves.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and full-time script consultant. My Twitter handle is @JimmyRGeorge.
I am Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter and author of Save the Cat Writes for TV and a Reese Witherspoon stan.
I am Bob Rose. I'm a guy on this podcast and I do some other stuff. And I am 50-50 on Reese Witherspoon standing. Mainly because I remember back in the day, she had kind of a beef with Kevin Smith, so I've always had like a marred view of her because of that.
I agree. That set a bad tone. I read his book where he
Greasy
kind of
Reese.
threw her under the bus. Greasy Reese.
Yeah.
But you know, I like her enough that I think she has her own. I bet she has her own story on that, and maybe I wouldn't like Kevin Smith as much.
Oh no, her talent is what I love. It's just the other stuff, you know, the Greasy Reese stuff.
I don't really know what his problem was with her either. He kind of is a little vague about it, just slightly vague, you know.
If I can remember reading his book, Jamie, it was like she compared Clerks to SLC Punk, and he took offense to it or something. I don't remember. Anyway, it has nothing to do with.
Love that movie.
Right? It doesn't. I think it was the comparison. It wasn't the quality.
Freeway was the bomb.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm a big fan of Overnight Delivery with Paul Rudd and Reese Witherspoon. Remember that movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, Legally Blonde. Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Who wrote it? Well, it's actually based on a book, which is kind of surprising to some people.
Mm-hmm.
A woman named Amanda Brown wrote I guess it's a fictionalized version of her own legal experience when she went to Stanford. And that manuscript ended up in a bidding war in the mid-90s. I think I read that I did my research on Wikipedia. It's
big time research.
It said she was initially turned down writing the book, but then submitted the book in pink and sent it. I don't know if it was sent it. I'll throw that in. And that's when the agent took notice. And shortly after, some bidding war started for movie studios to buy the rights to this book. And eventually, two screenwriters were put on this book. Karen McCullough and Kirsten Smith. I think I saw Kirsten Smith once in Austin. I think she was.
Oh, nice.
She showed up there. Yeah, back in the day. I'm doing a quick look. I'm just going to look at.
I remember seeing they wrote 10 Things I Hate About You, that team. Which is like a great back-to-back. Wow. Yeah, it was like 10 Things I Hate About You, then this.
So the reason I remember her is because 10 Things I Hate About You was, in my early screenwriting days, it was one of my inspirational screenplays. I love the screenplay.
Dude, we should do an episode on it.
Do it, man. That's Shakespeare.
Exactly. There was something about it. I loved the movie. I thought the movie was a lot of fun. But when I read the actual script, it was very instructive for the tone and just kind of the flavor that they put into that script. And I remember, I think I wanted to tell her that, but I didn't get the opportunity. Like I was going to do some lame fanboy complimentary thing. But I missed my opportunity, and then it never. But I remember working myself up, like, how am I going to say this exactly? But because it was truth, And then when she was there, I was like, oh, I should tell her how much this script helped me out in my writing. And it was the one I used to like when people used to ask me, like, what script would you look at? And this goes back 20 years. I'd probably give you a different one now. I don't know what I'd give you. But I used to say, go check out 10 Things I Hate About You.
Wow.
That's amazing, man. That's a surprising. I mean, I love that movie. So I'm not saying I don't like the movie, but I wasn't expecting you to say that. Let's say that.
Yeah, me neither.
I was not expecting Jamie to.
We're totally going to do an episode on that movie.
Was not expecting Jamie Nash to be a 10 Things I Hate About You super fan.
I am. And Reese. What does Kevin Smith say about 10 Things I Hate About You?
We'll find out. We'll research it, and then we'll find out for that episode.
Also, huge Julia Stiles fan. So that's it.
Yeah,
Save the Last Dance, man.
Yeah.
Hey.
This is like we're just gonna do like 90s.
Yeah, we're not
movies.
even talking about the script or screenwriting techniques.
We're gonna talk about all our favorite like 90s and aughts tween movies that we love.
The theme. Everybody's logged off already.
Three old white guys talking about their favorite teen movies.
Yeah.
By the way, this reminds me of a thing in Sister Act. No.
Look, I say we do Sister Act at some point. That'd be a good episode. But
we're just planning out future episodes instead of actually doing one right now.
But yeah, I was going to say.
By the way, Jason Mewes' favorite movie, Sister Act. No.
I would think you would like Sister Act 2 way more.
Absolutely.
It seems way more Jason Mewes. Yeah, so back on topic, Legally Blonde.
A lot of people don't talk about this as a novel adaptation, and we're not gonna. That's not gonna be something we talk about. Usually we do, but there's so much other craft to talk about. I feel like just talking about the adaptation, and I definitely didn't compare notes between what's in the movie and what's in the book.
What they changed. That'll be a great podcast. We'll do that next.
Maybe that, but also that substance from it being a book might actually have something to do with why it works so well. You know, like I'm sure that this could. A lot of people just assume this is a studio comedy with the traditional course of coming to realization, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess the book actually probably helps it have that substance. You know what I mean?
Maybe it gets more depth. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's where like the longevity comes from.
It made, by the way, $96 million domestically, $45 million internationally for a worldwide take of $141 million.
20 years ago, I mean, that's good.
Yeah. The budget was $18 million.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge hit. That's a huge hit.
And I'm sure they weren't expecting these kind of numbers from this movie.
Right.
You know, they probably were going to make it for 18, make about 30, maybe 25, and then make a ton of money off of DVDs. VHS was gone then, right? Yeah. 2001, it was gone, right? There was still Blockbuster. You could still rent it.
They had no idea they were making one of the great Harvard movies.
Right.
This is a great double feature with The Social Network. Like you watch them together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It kind of really works.
And then watch The Skulls.
Yeah, The Skulls.
This is what this podcast has become. Just early 2000s references, 90s references. Remember when?
Remember that movie? Let's do She's All That. Okay. Yeah, okay, so back to the actual outline instead of recommendations. Creating three-dimensional characters. Let's talk about that.
Wow, that was a great transition, Bob.
My transitions are terrible.
Dude. You've really got to work on that. I don't know. We're going to get you some Second City lessons or something. I don't know. I feel like
we admit there's an outline. They know. What do they want? Man. Yeah.
I think you could hide it a little better, though. You know, you could have said something like, you know, we're three-dimensional guys. Speaking of three dimensions, you know, there's a way to hide it. Come on.
So if you want me to try to hide it, I will.
I think just for this podcast, I'd like to see the attempt.
The attempt to hide it? Okay.
For today's podcast, just to see. We'll let the listeners decide.
Do it.
Jamie just wants me to improv things. Like
I do.
Just in between all the subjects. Okay.
That's right. That's right. I got a suggestion. You're in a do the whole podcast as if you're in a.
Well, guys, what's the reason we love those movies from the late 90s and the early aughts? It's because of the characters we remember. It's because of the way they were formed. And what about this movie forms the characters of Elle Woods so well, and her friends, and even the villains?
See, now you're arcing as a character. Speaking of character arcs, creating a three-dimensional character is really important. And Reese's character in this movie, the Elle Woods character, and again, I think you're right, it probably harkens back to the book, because the book was based on real life. It didn't have this kind of stylized 90s comedy like 10 Things I Hate About You or She's All That or the Jim Carrey. No, I'm just kidding. But this movie, she has more than just the stereotypical blonde that is that you'd almost expect from the title. And so here's an admission. I am not sure I ever saw this whole movie till this week.
Wow.
You agreed to do it so quickly too. I was like assuming you were kind of a fan.
No, not it really wasn't a movie that for whatever reason I went to see. And I think it's weird. I know a lot about it, so maybe I did watch it, but I have a feeling I've seen pieces of it, but I've never seen the whole thing. And I was actually really surprised when I turned it on, because I was like, I kind of knew it was always good, because there's been so much written about it and so many people have talked about it, and they use it as an epitome of kind of screenplay structure and character and arc and all these other things. So I kind of knew going in that it was going to be better than what the poster kind of would tell me about it. And I think it starts with this three-dimensional character. And one of the things, and I was talking to Jimmy about this, not in reference to this the other day, but there's an exercise you can do to come up with three-dimensional characters that may help and so I'm kind of going to walk you through this exercise while talking about the movie. But if you take a character and you say, what is their Jekyll and Hyde, so to speak? So what's their outer self and what's their inner self? Okay. So in Legally Blonde, we're kind of handed what has to be the outer self. It's a blonde, and everything that goes with it.
A California blonde.
California blonde.
Yeah.
That's the outside character.
Blonde. Yeah.
That's the Dr. Jekyll, we'll call it. That's the exterior character. And then when you're coming about a Hyde, the idea is when you're doing this for your own characters, you start with, okay, what's the quintessential personality trait that this character has? And you write that down. And then you say, well, what's either like the complete opposite of that, or what is something that undercuts that? What's a tension like that doesn't mix? Like the two just they're water and vinegar, so to speak, in some ways. And in her case, I'm not exactly sure. How do you think you'd phrase her inner self, the paradox, the thing that doesn't fit? California Blonde.
I can say where the movie tells us where it happens is in the scene in the clothes store, right? The inner self is that she's actually really knowledgeable. She remembers facts. She remembers information. She retains it, and she's ready to defend herself when she's being challenged for who people think she is on the outside, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I'm not sure how I'd label that. Like, is it capable? Is it, what would the
smart
personality?
I mean, I feel like smart.
Smart?
I think it's just the movie constantly keeps beating to the drum that people don't think she's smart because of her exterior.
Yes.
It's intelligence, right? The woman in the clothing store thinks she's an idiot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone assumes she's dumb.
So, and that's a great example. So, let's just say, super smart California blonde, and those two things fight against each other. So now you have multiple dimensions. Now you're just not dealing with a cliche. Now you're just not dealing with somebody that's one dimensional. I remember I saw a thing, we talked about tensity, and that's what really this is, this idea of tensity, two ideas that fight against each other. And they talked about like Star Wars, and they said like, Yoda is this rickety old, feeble warrior, super powerful warrior. He's like got these two things that fight against each other. But then Jar Jar is a character that just has one thing. He's just the fool. He doesn't have intelligent behind it. He doesn't have, and that's why Jar Jar isn't a great three-dimensional character.
I mean, if George Lucas wasn't a coward, he would have been.
Yeah. And that's why like Sith Jar Jar is interesting, right?
Right. If they went through with that actual plot line, that would have been incredible. But
yeah,
that didn't happen.
And that's what this is really chasing. So when you're coming up with your characters, try to come up with those two things that fight against each other. And then the last step is brainstorm scenes that show that inner character, like brainstorm some scenes. And I think Bob already nailed it. That scene in where the girl's like, oh, I love when these California blondes come in. We can totally screw them over.
It was California blondes with daddy's money.
With daddy's money.
Right.
And then she's like, she just puts that person in her place and shows that inner side. And I think if you can do that, it's one of these little exercises you can do before you start writing, is to come up with those Jekyll and Hyde parts and then try to come up with some way to show the Hyde part, show that inner side, the hidden side, the secret side, somewhere early in your story, usually in your setup. So also, that's my spiel on three-dimensional characters.
I feel
it's very effective.
It is. And I was going to say, like, one of the interesting things about this particular movie with this point is that I feel like if you look at the movie, with the exception of Luke Wilson, like putting him aside, I think the characters that actually do think she's all those opposing values are her actual dumb blonde friends. Like they believe, I don't think they know she's not dumb. They know that she is all of that. They know both sides of her personality.
Right.
And they're the ones that also walk through the world with the same stigma, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
They're like self-reflections of her for sure.
Right. So when we want to create a character like this with all these different opposing magnetic forces, what we do is we usually try to make a list, or sometimes we might write out a whiteboard, right?
Like, right.
To make these characters. How's this transition working, Jamie?
I was waiting for it, Bob, when he was talking about making the list of the scenes. I was like, here, let's get it there.
So
he's throwing it up for you.
So with that in mind, let us revisit how one would write a whiteboard for characters like this.
Yeah, so in past episodes, if you're listening for the first time, I'm sorry. But we've talked in several episodes about the concept of the whiteboard. And as we've also said, it doesn't have to be a whiteboard. It's whatever you are comfortable with, that where the ideas just flow and you have a place to write them all down. It could be an app on your phone. It could be a notebook. It could be index cards. It could be a file on your computer.
Sidewalk chalk.
Whatever the hell it is, where you just go and you come up with the goal is to come up with people, places, things, scenarios, dialogue, all the possible things that this premise could deliver. And if you focus on premise specificity, you're going to come up with so much material. What is it, Jamie? It's that 100 idea theory, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the best ways to test whether you have a good idea is to come up with 100. And if your one is still the best or in the top 10, it must be pretty good.
But I read scripts all the time. I'm reading amateur scripts like 5 days a week. And what I'll read is that scene that you describe at the dress store in this movie. I'll read a script that has like 3 scenes like that, and that's it. And the rest of the movie is sort of, the rest of the script will be something that could really happen in any story. It's not premise specific. So what I see constantly, I would say the number one most common problem I see in amateur scripts is not doing the whiteboard exercise, is not taking the time to come up with as many premise specific people, places, things, and scenarios that you could only experience in this movie with this premise.
Let me say a little more casually for people. In this one, you'd come up with the character of Elle Woods, and then you'd ask, what would Elle Woods be like walking into a Harvard classroom? What would she be like walking down the hall? What would she bring with her to live at Harvard? Like, you're asking all those questions and writing down.
Endless questions.
Like that, yeah.
It never stops. What if? It's an endless barrage of what if scenarios.
Right.
And yeah.
What does she do with her dog? Where does she go to vent? You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the key things is to look at it from the two different POVs. So if you look at it from her POV experiencing Harvard for the first time, but you also look at it from Harvard's experiencing her for the first time.
Yeah.
And if you, then you get kind of double duty out of that. You can kind of look at it from both ways.
Like, I'll give some examples. What does a sorority paddle look like in this premise? It's going to be like covered in gemstones, and it's going to be glitzed out. Well, the resume, I feel like, is like, if you want to understand what premise delivery is, the pink resume,
the scented pink resume,
is the scent, right? And she even says, I think it gives it something a little special, extra special, don't you? That is making the ordinary extraordinary. That is, premise delivery is making something ordinary extraordinary, because it instantly represents what the movie is. So that's the idea. I feel like we could just do whiteboard for the whole damn movie, but I just wanted to retouch on it since we haven't talked about it in a while.
It's funny. The one that it's a very minor detail, but for some reason it makes me laugh, is when she's there on the first day of class and she has that feathered pen. I don't know why. That feathered pen just cracks me up. And the teacher's like staring her down, and she's just writing away, and the feathers kind of flitting back and forth. But it shows you that even, and who knows, that might have not even been in the script. That might have been a prop person's whiteboard.
But they were doing whiteboard. Yeah, exactly.
But you can also see where that's
to the laptops.
Yeah,
everybody has the laptop.
Yeah, exactly. She has that one colored, laptop that's rounded off,
and a little pink notebook. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could also see where you would write that in a script. You could get kind of playful and says, as Elle's feather pen flits in the air, unnoticing the professor or something.
When she finally has her moment of realization that she's gonna, try. I love the fact that they had her buy like a colorful computer.
It's so her.
Like even then, you still get that little bit of delivery with her choice. It has to be colorful.
Exactly, right. Because if she's just going to a store and buying a computer, then it's not premise specific. Like, it's just, it could happen in any movie, but they made it so that it happens in this movie.
Yeah, she buys the orange and white, or I forget what color.
And she's still in the bunny outfit.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
he's like, what? Don't ask.
And along the lines of like how you said that it's not just Elle reacting to Harvard, it's Harvard reacting to Elle. So Harvard's technically the environment or the society, right? So, like, how does the society act as the villain in this case?
So, Jamie, we talked about...
That's me.
That was good.
It's so obvious I'm doing these transitions.
No, dude, you got to keep it going.
I didn't even notice it that time. It was amazing.
Bob, so smooth.
Oh, God.
I'm staring at the bullet points, and I didn't notice
I was doing that. Okay,
we're tracking Bob's character arc right now. So this movie is a bit unconventional from a broad comedy standpoint in that it doesn't have a central villain, and that's because the villain is actually society. And this movie is a great example of, if you've got I forget the way that Jamie, you've articulated it very well about society's ill being the villain.
Of course I have. In my book, Save the Cat Writes for TV. But just to transition to Save the Cat super quick, I decided, because it is one of his major ones and Save the Cat goes to the movies. So I haven't opened this book in ages, but I flipped it open to look at Legally Blonde. And Legally Blonde is a full triumphant in the save the cat genre.
Okay.
So full triumphant is a undervalued fool, quote unquote, and it usually doesn't mean necessarily that they are a fool, but that's the way that world perceives them.
The world,
right.
And usually they're kind of innocent, naive. They're slightly innocent, naive, because they don't judge the world like the world judges them, which is an amazing thing about her character. She's not judging anybody.
Would using the term idiot savant work here at all?
A bit. I like Elf is an example of full triumphant, and Being There is the classic full triumphant.
One of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, that's like the epitome of one. So Legally Blonde he dubs as a fool out of water is what he dubs it. And full out of water, you can imagine what that is. It's just somebody that goes from their world and goes to a new world. I mean, Elf might be a little like that too. And in that world, they're totally out of place. I guess Elf's out of place in both worlds, sort of. But anyway, she ends up in this new world where she's out of place, and they judge her like she's a fool, like she's worthless, and she has these hidden powers that will ultimately be triumphant and will kind of the world will come to appreciate, that world will come to appreciate her. So this is the long-winded way to go to the society part. But the society part is the establishment that she comes up against that thinks she's a fool. There's another Blake Snyder genre called institutionalized. And the big difference with that is, so institutionalized is something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, maybe.
Nurse Ratched is society.
Right.
Training Day he lists as like, the Society of Cops or something.
That works.
A lot of military stuff. So it's kind of like you enter this new organization and they try to assimilate you. And if you're going to assimilate, you either have to quit or blow up or whatever. There's only a few things you can do, but it's all about assimilation. Where in those movies, the difference is, this is where I'm finally landing this. The difference is, in most institutionalized, it's not the person isn't viewed as a fool. They actually want to bring them into the fold, but they question whether that's the right thing. Where in full triumphant, it's like the person doesn't fit at all. They don't even pay attention to
You're saying society's trying to push them away, like you don't belong here, leave.
Yeah, they have no value to the society.
Right.
In the other one, society is trying to make them assimilate, and that's where the tension lies. In full triumphant, it's all about the person just rubbing up against the society. So they're similar in some ways, but a long-winded way of saying. That's how these movies tend to function against.
Okay, that's a pattern of this type of movie. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you identify that you're telling that type of story, then this is the way to do it.
And also, it's responsible for how well it builds too, right? Like as she continues to prove them wrong.
Break down walls, yeah, absolutely.
Break down walls, yeah.
And
the key is to put a face on that society.
Exactly.
And I think or faces.
Yes.
And I think that's what this movie does, because you have Selma Blair as kind of a face of a student that might be kind of snarky or something. I know there's also the problem that she's the fiance. And then you have various professors also that become the face of the villain at times.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can also...
shop.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the dress shop worker is a face of society. Yes. It's all about the like I was labeling it as stereotyping and bias based on people's station in life, and if you really think about it, like so it's the dress shop worker does it. Warner, Elle's parents are telling her like, what do you want to do this for? They're stereotyping their own daughter. It's Paulette's ex-husband is stereotyping Paulette. Like it's not just Elle. It's sort of all around. Like everybody is like a version of that in Elle's way, and I see this done a lot, right? Where society is the villain of the story, but we don't get faces of society. We just get like random occurrences where society is the villain. Whereas this one does a great job of like giving actual characters to represent that. So,
Also, it also has like I guess there's two characters in the movie I could think of that would be like society's defectors, where they're completely part of it, but they also can step out of it, right? Like Luke Wilson, obviously, but also the nerdy guy. Like, yes, he is completely 100% supposed to be at Harvard. His intelligence is there, but also he has literally no problem accepting L. You know, like,
and he's also somebody that is experiencing that stereotyping based on being a nerdy guy. So yeah,
he could have his own movie, really.
He could.
Yeah, he could.
His perspective at Harvard.
His literal like stare at her when she's introducing herself is one of my favorite parts of the movie. And literally that moment. But I was gonna say, like, a character like him, is that something we would consider a window character?
I think so, but the main window. Bob can't.
I tried, man. I tried.
You gotta. Now, step 2 in the evolution is not to underline your own transitions.
Yeah,
with laughter or having a need to call them out because you feel so cheesy.
No, so we barely have ever talked about this. The concept of window characters. Often what I'll read. I'm sorry I keep bringing up client scripts, but you know it's just it's relevant.
It's pretty relevant.
Yeah. So often in a lesser so often what I'll read is scripts with supporting characters, and the writer does a fantastic job with characterization and giving them their own beats and their own moments. And Paulette has her own story. She has her own, several beats of growth and she has her own mini story within the movie. But Paulette and Emmett's function for the story is to give us a window into Elle and how she's feeling about her progress and her regression. And what I often read is scripts that get everything right except for that. They never use that supporting character to ask questions and probe the main character about how they're feeling. How are you feeling right now? Essentially, like, your supporting character's main function is to give the audience an opportunity for the main character to vocalize like their feelings. Like, how are you feeling right now, Elle? Tell us. Paulette's gonna let you tell us. Emmett's gonna let you tell us. And we get all the big moments, all the big emotional moments are when Elle is like revealing to Paulette how she feels about what we just saw happen, and how Elle is revealing to Emmett about how she feels about what just happened in the scene before.
The specific moment I can think of, Jimmy, is when they confront Paulette's ex to get her dog back. And there's that moment in the car after they have successfully gotten the dog back where Elle just takes a moment and looks at her and nothing is said. And you get the feeling that she's like, okay, I know what I need to do in my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's literally her looking through a window to herself,
Yeah.
Just to be literal about it.
But if you watch the movie for the moments where we get the best understanding of how Elle is feeling, it'll be in those scenes where she's talking to Paulette and where she's talking to Emmett, because that is their function, and they're used very effectively in the story. So,
right, and both of them are classic B story, helper character. Sometimes they're mentor characters, sometimes it's the Obi-Wans, but in this case, characters like that are kind of the B story Obi-Wans of the story that help her figure out her personal themes, her internals, and they track through a story throughout. But that's their main function.
And this movie, it seems like the characters are either kind of an echo of Elle herself.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're, or Luke Wilson, which is obviously forming as a love interest. But you know what I mean? Like Ali Larder, I forget the name of...
Brooke Wyndham and Paulette are both reflections of the type of person that society views as Elle. Yep.
In different statuses. Like Paulette's obviously, she's viewed as lower class, and then she's upper rich, and
They're experiencing the same like villain society as the villain problems that Elle are.
A dumb blonde who works in a hair salon and a dumb blonde who married into money. It's like they're taking the stereotypes.
And they're not really dumb.
They're not. None of them are dumb.
Yeah. They're stereotyped as being that. Yeah.
Right, because the society's viewing them as broken and in some way, and they're of course
less than
right, and of course nobody's perfect. Elle is not perfect, right? Elle has things about her that are in need of maintenance. So what are those things?
So one of Blake's big things in his book, and we're talking about Save the Cat here again, but this is, one of the quintessential Save the Cat discussed movies that the book uses as a teaching tool. Blake talks about setting up your character in the first act with 6 things that need fixing. It doesn't always have to be 6, but generally, like, the great characters have around 6. And this is taking directly from the book. They generally fall into 5 categories: changes in attractiveness, false beliefs or personality changes, strained personal relationships, not being entrusted with responsibility or not being able to handle responsibility, being invisible to key people, and others don't believe in you or you've given up on yourself. With this movie, they're all kind of like blended. They're kind of like all like the things that need fixing are kind of all of those things. Like false beliefs. Like, so when Elle loses her, first of all, we'll talk about strained personal relationships. Well, Warner breaks up with her.
Right.
When we meet her, and immediately after, false beliefs, her friends say, "It was so sad. We all thought she'd be the first one to walk down the aisle, and now she's totally adrift." And then she sets herself on a mission, this is still in the first act, to get Warner back. And her false belief is essentially that marriage to Warner is her purpose. Like, marriage specifically to Warner. So we get the false belief. Not being entrusted with responsibility or not being able to handle responsibility. Where both Warner and her parents are like, you can't do that. Like, her parents are trying to talk her out of going to law school. So people
her parents are so society, it's ridiculous. They raised her and they don't even believe. Yeah,
I know it's and then being invisible to key people, it's the same thing, right? Like, they don't see her for anything more than a dumb blonde, right? They don't even technically. I mean, her friends believe in her. They're very supportive, but they're kind of like on that same train. Like, there's
a whole, come on, you know what you're actually gonna do, come on.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, there's like that whole just aside by everyone,
though they do help her. They do help her study for the LSATs. So.
I think also it's not to interrupt you, but in the moment when Warner does, before he breaks up with her, it's pretty clearly written that Elle views herself as the future wife of a successful man. You know what I mean?
True.
Like, that's how she has also, even though she's smart and she can be accomplished, she's not looking upward. She's looking like sideways. You know what I mean?
All the major things that would come in her life with marrying a senator,
right?
A senator,
right.
Which is what he wants to
She
do.
views her future as part of his life, not her own.
That
life.
world.
Yeah.
Warner's world is her purpose,
right?
And that's the main thing that needs fixing. And then the others don't believe in you or you've given up on yourself. Like, others, she hasn't given up on herself at all, but like no one believes in her.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thinks she can't do it. I mean, that's the whole movie. So it's a very classic case of the 6 things that need fixing. It's another great example that if you're trying to learn what is that, what does it look like, watch this movie, and hopefully it'll inspire ways to do those things with your own story and your own characters.
Yeah, and tied to that, because since we're on Save the Cat, let's just jump into Save the Cat stuff. The very essence of Save the Cat is, you save a hero saves a cat and you're on their side. There's somebody worth rooting for. So in my Save the Cat book, I call that the rooting resume, and I kind of expanded a little bit beyond just a Save the Cat moment, because I think there's a lot of other things You know, in this movie, you can almost click off a million boxes of why we should root for this character. And in fact, when I was watching it, I was like, why do I like this movie so much? And I think the reason is I wanted her to succeed so badly in this movie. There's something amazing about this movie as far as that goes.
I would say there's something amazing about Elle in general. I was going to say, like, when I watched this twice for this episode. So it came down to me, like, she kind of acts as a Ferris Bueller, except completely without privilege. You know, like, Ferris Bueller is kind of held up as, like, a king. And so is Elle, but not as soon as the second she leaves, we don't ever get to see Ferris outside of his element. Whereas she leaves and she's not in her element, and she's still, all of her values are completely and utterly intact. She is a very wholesome character. She believes in everyone. She doesn't treat anyone differently. You know, she looks as though everyone is an equal from the get-go, and it never is challenged. That about her is never challenged.
Even Vivian,
she's like, yeah, she even can give her.
She has multiple opportunities to talk shit on Vivian. Paulette even asked her, like, about her.
Yeah.
And she's like, she could use some highlights, but she's not that bad.
She's not that unfortunate looking. Yeah. She's just a wholly good human being. Like, there's that part of it, which also I think is a part of, because I think selfishness would come into play, right, in how society would normally view her, but she's not that at all. She's a good person.
One character that always stands out to me is the main character in Shawshank. And the main character in Shawshank, the reason that character stands out to me is that's a movie filled with dread and tension and bad things, but that character is so unflappably optimistic throughout the thing. It just keeps moving forward on a path, and the world tries to bring that person down and back, but and the person has their moments, the lead character has their moments, but they keep, like, fighting on, and it always stands out to me, that character in that. And I think Elle is a little like that in some ways. What happens with her, and just so there's this thing called the rooting resume, and again, it's in my book where I expand a little bit on Save the Cat. And some of the things you can do in your scripts to help is you can make your characters, the number one is to make your character an underdog. Imagine this movie if she wasn't an underdog, if she was rich and privileged and somehow bought her way through everything and it was easy, it just wouldn't, it wouldn't work, right? It wouldn't work at all if she was not the underdog. If she was, and this movie kind of usurps the fact that she, puts her in an underdog place. And the way it does it is we immediately see how she's undervalued for the perception of who she is, the dumb blonde thing, that the California dumb blonde, like, she's not as smart. And we see that right away in that scene that we talked about already. In Blake's book, he calls that scene, I don't know if I agree that sometimes he threw these terms out. He called it a kill the cat scene. And I'm like, how's that a kill the cat? I don't know.
Okay.
I was trying to wrestle my head. Let me read you what he said super quick. So he describes that. No, I'm sorry. This is for the next scene. When she gets dumped by Reese, he calls that the kill the cat scene. He said this variation on the save the cat scene is called kill the cat and works exactly the same way. Until this moment, we think Reese is a tad plastic, but after seeing her smushed, we feel for her. From this point forward, we'll root for her to get whatever she wants. And while I agree with everything, I'm just debating
I mean, outside, I don't know if I totally agree with. I know who am I to disagree with Blake Snyder, but I feel like I'm rooting for her from the fashion store on.
Absolutely.
Like, before she gets broken up with, I'm rooting for her already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Immediately.
I mean, I'm rooting for her to actually, like, leave him when they meet. Like, I don't want them to get together. One
of the rooting resumes is somewhere on here is that other people like them, and the movie starts out with this traveling congratulations card or good luck card from the entire sorority that's, like, traveling the campus and then the sorority house, and everyone's signing it.
She's the most popular.
Like, everybody likes her. Before you even meet her, you see all these people are, like, rooting her on, which tells you a lot about how she who she is before we even meet her.
She's enriched their lives. Like, it's
someone
obvious.
knocks on the door. Someone knocks on the door before we even meet Elle. Someone knocks on the door and says, "Hey, can you help me out with that thing you were helping me out with before?" It's like these little subtle things that, like, you know, so that checks a box for us. Oh my God, she's like helping out this. She's helpful and, you know, generous and
so she's well liked. She and she respects the other people at the same time. It's reciprocated, so we can see why she'd be well liked. There are other things too, like just that she's kind of naive and silly and stuff like that. I mean, in a way, that's something she has to overcome.
There's a purity to that, though.
There is. She's very likable. It's like there's something very fun about her. Like you say, a purity to it. She's very wholesome. So when she has that catastrophic disappointment, I mean, that is a huge thing that helps us empathize with the character. We feel, because for all her privilege that she may have, she has, you know, basically we see her suffer like the worst disappointment she's ever suffered in her life, and to do so in a very unjust way. So the world's treating her unjust throughout the whole thing. And then the hits keep coming. I mean, she does things that we wish we could be like. She sets her mind to something, and she actually shows that she's really smart. She's able to get into Harvard. I mean, she does it in a creative sort of way, you know?
Yeah, like you said, it's not just her parents buying her way into Harvard. She gets into Harvard for real, normally.
For real.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah, it is.
That's a key thing, that she gets in there. And that's why we're on board with her, because she actually made it into Harvard. She passed the LSAT the way she needed to. She built her video. She got in. Yeah. You know, all those things are super critical. And they're things that we wish we were more, again, like her. She's empathetic. You know, the nail salon friend becomes her good friend, and she cares about her. She tries to help her. She has things like she's super loyal. We find that out later on when she won't give up the secret of the client, of Ellie Larder's secret, no matter what, even though it could benefit her. So she's crazy loyal. And the hits keep coming and coming and coming like that. They almost never stop. And that's why that's why it goes beyond Save the Cat. Like, Save the Cat feels like, oh, you do this one thing and that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like the minimal thing you have to do, you know.
And I think it's very instructive in that way, because, like you said, Jamie, a lot of writers approach it like you only need to throw those rooting influencers in there in the beginning, but you can keep them piling on and just nonstop. You can use those same techniques you're using to set up a character and get us like to root for them. You can just keep doing the same thing in different ways for the duration of your story, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, a lesser movie would have made her, again, privileged and spoiled and all these things, and then just have her nice to her little dog, and they'd be like, okay, that's enough.
Yeah, she's got a dog.
Actually, I was going to say having a dog is a rooting influencer.
Yeah, having a dog is one.
Yeah.
Caring about kind of animals,
caring about it, and kind of loving the dog and showing you have that softer side. And if it was a Jim Carrey movie where he was a total jerk and needed to learn a lesson, maybe that would be enough.
The one thing, there's the dog.
Yeah, he loves that dog, and maybe there's hope for him in the end to not be such a jerk. I think one of the things this comes back to, and I haven't put this into the lab, so I'm not sure if this is going to hold true. When we talked about the Jekyll and Hyde thing earlier, the outward appearance being the California blonde, but the inward side being kind of a positive, a good. Where I think like the Jim Carrey thing, I don't know. It might be an emerging thing.
Are you like comparing this to Bruce Almighty type of thing, where it's like he's a complete asshole at the beginning of the movie?
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's almost like their inner self needs to be healed in those movies.
This is not the case.
Doesn't need to be healed.
She's a good person.
That's right. That's right. So if you circle that Hyde part, and Hyde isn't corrupt, there is something a little different than that. It's more like an emerging or confidence. We're going to get to character arc next, I think. It's my bad transition. But we talked about the two major character arcs, right? The learn to care more, or learn to be more confident. And she's more of the learn to be more confident, where I think the learn to care more is the person that needs the kind of corrupt inner self fixed a little bit.
That's Selma Blair in this movie, right? Even though it's a small arc, but
yeah, it could be.
It's more like Selma Blair learns that she's the villain.
And she, and then she learns to care more.
She's stereotyping.
She's stereotyping, so she learns to care more. Yeah.
Yeah, Jamie, this is this is my favorite part of what we've lined up to talk about that I want to talk about with the two of you guys, because I had a very spirited talk with my wife, who this is like one of my wife's favorite movies, and about what does El Arc. And so I'm interested to see what you guys think.
I did write a point on this last week because we had to cancel an episode.
Oh, that was your point. Okay.
So this is my point. I wrote this the first time I had watched it in years, which was last week, and then we had to cancel. So I'm glad you want to talk about this because I was worried.
Oh man!
And by the way, when you brought this up, I was thinking about this the whole time I was watching.
See, this
we were all thinking the same thing.
This makes me feel
dude,
good. Okay,
great discussion.
Okay.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Bob, what made you think that way?
So I wrote down, does the movie function like a flat arc? The world around her changes and bends to her. Not now, and I also wrote, belief in herself is easily stated in the last line of the movie. It's like literally just a part of the dialogue. So I'm not saying she doesn't change, but there's a part of me that feels like she's so virtuous as a person that I don't... There's a difference between a character learning something about themselves and changing as a person, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I feel like there's two separate things there. It's very nuanced, but I don't is Elle a different person at the end of the movie than she was at the beginning? It's an interesting question because I think there can be an argument for both.
Yes.
And honestly, when I was watching, I was getting ready. I was like going to write the flat arc question. Like I was debate as I was watching the movie. But the way I always look at flat arc is like, I think Superman stories, mostly in the comic, is like Superman never, I mean, Zack Snyder aside or something.
Christopher Reeve Superman is an easy one to say. Yeah.
Superman's kind of this idealistic character. His heart's in the right place. He knows what's right, but then the world keeps challenging him. Like, well, what if we kill Lois Lane if you do that? Are you still a good guy? We'll blackmail you. And the world's fighting against his inner code, and he's wrestling against it. And ultimately, kind of usually in a good Superman story, figures it out, and everybody is the better for it. They rise up to be as good as Superman almost.
He improves the world.
Inspired.
He improves society around
the world. She does that too. She does that too. She's herself. She stays true to her values. Even when she's screwed over in that bunny suit thing, she's like, good one on you, but I'm just going to stand here and be myself. It's a real empowering movie. And, even then people kind of look and say, what you did is, you could see people changing, like looking at her and saying
right there.
I can be better because she can overcome these things and be herself. There's another way to be just by looking at her.
Right.
So that is totally a flat arc. However, there's another side of me that looks at it and says, could her in the beginning of the movie have done the things she did in the end? And I say no.
Yeah, there's that. There is that too.
So Jamie, that's your classic. So Jamie, you have this great exercise, the before and after snapshot of your character, which you just described. And it's really interesting, right? Because I actually think, so I think she does change, but oddly, I wouldn't call it an arc. In that she finds new purpose. And the first half of the movie is a wrong way goal. And her goal is to get Warner back because she believes that being a part of Warner's world is her purpose, as Warner's world as his wife of the senator and everything. And I'm not saying she thinks marriage is her only future. It's more about being getting Warner, marrying Warner. She loves Warner.
No, Warner's the reason she goes to Harvard. Right. It's
and then when we'll get to later when we hit the midpoint and she realizes no, that's I can do this. I can like have my own future that doesn't involve Warner and do things for myself. And so for me, she does change and she finds new purpose, and she couldn't do the things that she would do when we met her because that wasn't her purpose. But I think she's fully capable. Like, I think if you put her in a courtroom in the opening scene and she had the like legal jargon, the realization that she makes about the perm is something she knew when we met her. And the tenacity that she has and the confidence in herself, I think
she would still be the same in that regard.
She would still win the case. Like her legal knowledge does not win the case. Her like the things about herself that she already had that she was passionate about, like, you know, that she gives that line that I didn't write down about like the rules of hair care. Any Cosmo girl would know. Well, she knew that when we met her. And also, like, I don't think she is somebody who doesn't believe in herself. I think she believes in herself from the moment we meet her. I don't think she ever needs to learn how to believe in herself. She's got a 4.0 GPA. She's the president of her sorority. She's tenacious as shit. She's like super well achieved. And like, so we don't see her become a person.
She believes, how about this? At the end, she believes in herself as a lawyer.
Yes. In her new purpose.
Yeah. Like, it's not in herself. It's herself as this. Like, I can do
and a new
this. New purpose,
new life.
New goal.
Yes.
New life. Yeah.
So it's weird because for a movie that's so classic and so beloved and feels so cookie cutter, it's not at all like in that way.
It's a definitely weird discussion because I'm glad I wrote that down because I was definitely like, is she sure? Like, learning some new information is not changing as a person.
Right.
Like you said, her just knowing how shit works now doesn't mean she's different. Her being herself wins the case in a way that no one in that room or that school could have ever done.
Exactly.
And so she stays herself completely. So
the world does, and the world's everybody. They have that great. Every person in the courtroom gets their own reaction shot because it's like everyone in the world who didn't believe that she was capable of this is having their eyes open. All the oh my gods. That's all the villains, the society's villains. Being shown like you're wrong and you need to change your mindset, you know, because look at what she did.
She literally stayed herself and won.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the whole movie is her one scene after another being frustrated, not that she can't do it, that people don't believe that she can do it.
Right. There's some nuance there to what it is.
Well, I think that's very similar to what my perceived Superman story is too. Yeah. You know, it's not like that Superman ever really changes, but sometimes he has doubts. And the doubts are a big part of it. Sometimes he questions himself, and we feel his stress and his pain because the world is a painful place and he's idealistic. So, and I think similar here, like when we get to the all is lost and things like that, like she's like, you know, I guess the world, you know, she has her doubts. She's like, I guess the world does think I'm a big idiot and I should just go home and I should have never come here. And she needs encouragement to stick it out, but she still, it's less that she didn't believe and more that she keeps getting knocked off her perch in some ways.
Well, it's just
have to climb back up to it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the moment in the hair salon when her professor surprisingly is there and she says, if you quit because of some asshole, you're not the girl I thought you were. There is that moment.
And that like here's her lines speak what the villain what society's problem is. Like she says, all people see when they look at me is blonde hair and big boobs. That is the ill of society, stereotyping.
Right.
No one's ever going to take me seriously. The people at law school don't. Warner doesn't. Sexism. Yeah. I don't think my own parents take me seriously. Just like we said, it felt like for the first time someone expected me. So someone, not herself, someone else It felt like for the first time someone expected me to do more with my life than become a Victoria's Secret model, but I was just kidding myself. Callahan never saw me as a lawyer. He just saw me as a piece of ass, just like everyone else. Like, so, like, I mean, she's vocalizing how she feels about the world as a villain. And we see that she's right. Like, yeah.
Well, to clarify, she knows that she's not those things. Like, she doesn't need to be taught that she's not those things. She's just saying society won't accept me.
She needs the world to figure it out.
Yeah, she needs the world to figure it out. She's already there. She knows what she is.
Yeah, and I was just saying, like, she knows she's right that society is the wall in front of her.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like Superman, like you said, he would give up because nobody accepts his values. It's not that he doesn't know that they're right. He knows that they're true and they're right. But he's like, if humanity won't accept them, what can I do? Right.
And this is a very empowering movie in that way. You know, it's very metaphorical for,
absolutely.
You know, in that sense. So even in that context, it makes sense. You know, it's not, the problem isn't necessarily in you. It's in, you know, maybe there's things holding you back that you have to fight through, but it's not because of you. I mean, you have it within you already.
Yeah.
In some ways. That's the empowering part of it. No, I buy it. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think that, like, kind of push and pull between the two things we were talking about also makes the movie that much more interesting to watch. You know, and it also adds to the comedy of it. Like, you know, because at no point do you doubt Elle.
Right.
There's no moment that you doubt Elle in this movie, just ever. Yeah.
It's funny. I never really thought of her like of the superhero mold, but there is an element there without the supernatural powers. She absolutely is.
She is not just good; she is virtuous. You know, like she is a force of truth. Like she just is.
Justice.
Yeah.
Since we brought it up, I had a later point about the break into 3 because we kind of brought it up. I have a lot of people that ask me about the break into 3. It's a problem people have. So the break into 3 is a save the cat terminology for the moment that takes us into Act 3. It kind of transitions us from an all is lost moment where somebody is the worst thing happened. In this case, it's when her boss or whatever,
Callahan.
Yeah, when he kind of makes a move on her, and she you know, blows up and quits, and you know, walks out on him, and that's her lowest point, because she doesn't think society can ever see past, you know, the physical side or whatever they think are the stereotypes. And then in this movie, the break into 3, so it's kind of the point where she's down low. What's going to get her to keep going, to come up with a new plan, to try to succeed? Like, when does she make that decision to go forward and keep going? And in some movies, it would have been, this is the bad example, but from this, I'm just plucking this from this movie. You can imagine if she was getting her hair done in the nail salon and they talked about perms, and she was like, perms, aha, that's the thing.
Right.
So some movies, that would be the break into 3. It's that new piece of information that allows them to realize they can win, right? And that's like the plot-driven version of it. In a lot of TV shows I watched as a kid, like Murder, She Wrote, it would be something like that. It would be like, you know, Bleach, aha, I know who did it, or something, you know.
It's Independence Day, right? When he says you're gonna catch a cold, and then he's like, wait a minute, I'll give all the ships a cold. Yeah, right.
It's like television when I grew up, every show, that's what it did to get to the third act. It was like, this is so lame. So this movie does the other version of it, which I think is the internal version of it. It's the encouragement. It's the character arc version of it, where somebody reminds
you, Jamie, you broke up a little bit there.
Reminds them their internal side. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Repeat it.
Make sure my mic's set.
Repeat it.
It's not you. It's the connection.
Yeah. So. Yeah, no worries. So this movie does the opposite. It does the internal side of it, where it kind of has a mentor figure, kind of reminds them and course corrects them internally so that they can carry on with the journey. And it's that scene where the professor overhears her in the in the nail salon, and then comes over and says, if you let a prick do this, you're not the girl.
I think it's like a 1-2 punch, right? Like
yeah.
Emmett gives her encouragement too, so it's like both of those encourage her characters.
Yep. And usually then it's usually combined with the choice to do something, whatever the plan is. This one, there's kind of like the other characters conspire to get her hired as the lawyer. That kind of happens too. So it's kind of like both of those things together.
Gotcha.
Is she gets the course correction, which she'd need, because just getting hired her as the lawyer, she might not do it if she wasn't course corrected. But
right.
She was just going to walk out. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, it reminds me, when you're saying that, I didn't really think about the two versions of A Break Into 3. It reminds me of like speaking of superhero, it reminds me of like the Matrix, when Neo's like doubting himself and that he can help save Morpheus, and right. Trinity's like, no, like you have to, because you're the one, like the Oracle. She's like that window character, reminding him of his purpose and that he can do this, and bringing him back up. And as we talked about in that episode, we were shocked at how internally focused the Matrix is, how much that story is driven by Neo's internal growth as opposed to like the plot. So yeah, it's true.
Yeah, no, it works. Also, like, I always try to put stuff in more layman's terms. So what you're basically saying is the Break Into 3 here is about Elle. It's not about the case. This isn't a courtroom movie.
Yeah.
Even though it does have a courtroom scene, it's not a courtroom movie. The actual case is not the point, like, at all. Like, that's not her struggle. Yeah. She figures it out, then goes to the courtroom and uses her own wildiness to do it.
Yeah, it's basically like everybody saying, like, screw Callahan, screw the society's stereotypes, just stay true to yourself like you've been doing.
I'm gonna shirk my transitioning ability right now to admit
that would have been a hard one.
Did Jamie skipped over two things? So,
yeah.
I don't know where we're going right now, but we technically would be talking about fun and games, not so fun. And I'm kind of interested to hear this one.
So the fun and games is the section of the script where, usually it's kind of the act 2 and save the cat when you first start act 2, and it's a hero pursuing a goal in the face of obstacles. And a lot of students and stuff kind of confuse this. They think fun and games should be fun and light and not a lot of tension or something like that. And when I was watching this movie, they keep piling horrible things on her from the very beginning. Like, she shows up on campus, people are laughing at her. She goes to class, she gets kicked out of class. Check out Malibu Barbie. She gets kicked out in her first day after being nice. She gets thrown out of class. She gets, she just keeps getting unjustly beaten up and beaten down. Like, she shouldn't be there in the fun and games. So I just thought that this was a very instructive movie to watch, to realize that fun and games is not necessarily fun for your character. It might be the most miserable time. In some ways, she has more fun in the second half of the movie than she does in the first half, when she's on a law team and she's getting respected. But the first half isn't fun at all. And it ultimately leads to the next thing, which I call, in this movie, I've noticed these. I've started to categorize these as not quite all is lost moments or midpoints. Okay,
right.
Because she suffers something that could be an all is lost in another movie. Like, you could see us. Let's say we didn't have the courtroom drama part of it. Let's say we were brainstorming our movie and we didn't have that legal case in the end. It was just about school. You could see where the midpoint, which I'm dubbing the midpoint. It's arguable where the midpoint is, but it's around the midpoint. When what's the guy's name again? Warner.
Yeah.
Where Warner basically says, you don't belong here. And he basically
says you're not smart enough.
He says you're not smart enough. He basically finishes it with her forever. It's done. That really is an all is lost kind of moment. I mean, you could totally see in a different movie where that would be the all is lost moment. And this is the midpoint. And And the reason I think that's so fascinating is a lot of people, when they're brainstorming and they're outlining, a lot of times I'm constantly telling my students, your all is lost should be your midpoint. I'm constantly telling my students that. I see an all is lost. Sometimes their all is lost should be their midpoint, and their high tower surprise should be their all is lost, and they need a new finale or something. But keep in mind when you're outlining, if you're using kind of a save the cat thing, sometimes your all is lost could get slotted as a midpoint, and you need a bigger all is lost moment. Mm-hmm. And this movie, that's the way it works. It kind of is plot twisty in that way. The big plot twist is halfway through the movie, she doesn't care about him anymore. She just wants to graduate law school. It's a plot twist. It's a goal change in some ways.
Mm-hmm. It's like almost another movie. It's not another movie, but it's like just okay. So we're shirking that whole thing, and it's really early on.
Old.
Yeah. It's super early
it's your classic wrong way goal story, right? Like the first half is the wrong way goal, and we know it's the wrong way. We as the audience know, and we're rooting for her to align with what we know. You're better than this. You don't need him. Do it for yourself. And then she does, and she realizes, like, he's never going to see me as anything other than a dumb blonde with big boobs. And so, fuck that.
And usually around the midpoint is where you have this internal turning point. And moral premise calls it the moment of grace. The Rick and Morty guy, I can't think of his name, Don Harmon.
Dan
Harmon. I wanted to call him Don for some reason. Don Harmon, his brother, calls it the goddess moment in his version. And it's kind of an internal learning check mark, and sometimes it happens before the midpoint, sometimes it like right before the midpoint, sometimes it happens at the midpoint, sometimes it happens right after the midpoint, but somewhere around there's usually some internal look in the mirror moment. And I think that's what she has here. I think she sees what's going on. She looks in the mirror and says, I don't want to be, this guy doesn't deserve me, basically, and I have other priorities. And she switches up. So I think it's a really instructive one to see. By the way, it's not quite the only reason. It's not quite the midpoint. It's like the 42-minute mark.
42 minutes.
42 minutes.
44 minutes is the midpoint. It's 2 minutes away.
You could. Yeah. There's a way you could argue that. Like I could see you arguing that when she is asked to hand her resume for the big internship, like that could be a midpoint as well. But I kind of view that this major turning point is more the midpoint. That's just my own personal.
Well, and you know what, Jamie, bouncing off of what you were talking about were the fun and games. There's a fun and games part 2 that starts. There's a fun and games really like part 3 that starts when she now has that new goal, which is for herself to succeed in law school. And we get to see her like buying a laptop and doing, getting her hair done, her doing her homework while she's at the salon. And
it's a montage.
It's literally a montage of Harvard stuff.
Yeah. And I wanted to say, like, we kind of got out of fun and games before. I wanted to say, like, this movie's a great example where if the premise delivery is strong enough, if you come up with as many premise specific scenarios as possible, the whole movie can feel like fun and games.
Right.
And I feel like this is an example where any moment in the movie you could pop in the trailer and it sells the movie. Like whether it's 30 minutes in, whether it's 50 minutes in, you just take one scene out of the movie and put it in a trailer and you'll know what the movie is.
It's because it's so clearly she's a fish and she is seriously out of water, and you can just feel it with everything she says.
Well, the delivery on the promise is so strong and so specific. Yeah.
My arc is just accepting that it's not always going to work with the transitions. That's my arc. I've learned that it's always not going to work out, but you can still get to the end somehow.
You know what's sad though? Jimmy laid it right out there for you to say, like, and speaking of premise, I mean, one way you can bring back fun and games is you can actually twist it back on itself. And does this movie do that, Jimmy? What do you think?
There you go. Jamie did it. Jamie did it for me. Good job, man.
So when you're coming up with ideas on your whiteboard, one thing Jamie and I have we like to call something called premise pretzels, where it's taking the idea of the premise and really even taking like a scenario you come up with and twisting it in as many different ways as possible that the movie allows you to explore. So there's a couple great examples of a premise pretzel in this movie. The first one is and there's also a bit of repetition. It's kind of the same thing in this case, but getting big news when she takes the LSATs and she's at her sorority, the whole sorority is crowded around her waiting for her results of the LSATs. And she gets the LSATs. She got what she needed to get into Harvard, and the whole sorority lifts her on their shoulders and rejoices. Yay! Okay, 50 minutes in, she's like trying to push her way into a crowd that's around a piece of paper of Callahan has chosen people to help him with his cases and chosen interns. And she pushes her way in, and so it's the opposite. Like no one is supporting her or encouraging her, and she finds out that she got on the team, and no one is happy for her. So it's a great example of a premise pretzel where they took the same idea and they did it completely different, but it's like the same concept.
And she's never had that before, and she's still like she's never been completely like unsupported in that moment
by everyone around her.
Yeah.
So it's a great example of a premise pretzel. And then another one is when we see her help David, the other lawyer that you were talking about, Bob. David asks a woman out on campus, and he's a Harvard student just like they are. Mm-hmm. So like as far as like from an education standpoint, he's on the same level.
He belongs there.
He belongs there, right? He's earned his place there. And they literally say to him, because he's nerdy, they say, girls like me don't go out with losers like you. And she overhears this, and that is like how people treat her. And she swoops in and pretends that David was the best lover she's ever had. And then the woman that originally turned him down asks him when he wants to go out. So it's a great example of a premise pretzel, right? Instead of Elle receiving this mistreatment, Elle witnesses someone else, receiving this mistreatment and does the same thing she's been doing to help somebody else. So, it's a great example of taking an idea and twisting it around and doing the same thing with it, only different in the same story.
Also, he's sort of the as society goes, he's sort of the inverse of Elle.
Yes,
where he's viewed as super smart and completely unappractive. You know what I mean? Like he's like the inverse of her premise.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
That's great, Bob. That's a great. It's so true.
Yeah, it works like that. It's good.
But it's kind of like it uses a premisey notion, creatively repetitive in some ways.
I was gonna say that.
You can also use repetition to show character growth in your story, right? Right, Jimmy?
It's funny. I thought I cut this off of the outline because we have so much, but it's great. So a very easy way to show the audience that your character is growing is to introduce them either succeeding and then show them in the same situation failing over time, or introduce them into a situation where they are failing and show them learn how to succeed. And so this is a great example of that. Like we see her in the class and she's unprepared. And this is a person who we've witnessed work her ass off to get here. But even then she gets into class and it's like, oh yeah, I have to be prepared for this too. And she's unprepared, and that, Vivian shows her up. And then we see over the course of the various classroom scenes how she's stepping up her legal knowledge. She's getting a laptop like the rest of them, where originally she just had a piece of paper and the fluffy pen that we talked about before. But by the end of those series of scenes, and it's not a montage, like it's shown over those classroom scenes are planted kind of over the course of the second act, and we just get to see her get better and better in the classroom scenario, and it shows us how she's growing into like a better lawyer, a better person who's like more focused on her purpose of being a good lawyer instead of just being getting Warner to marry her. So, yeah.
I feel like we haven't also pointed out it's not just about her being a better lawyer. It's that she's actually like enjoying it. She's actually found something she loves and she's passionate about. She's finding a passion in the movie actively. It's not just that she's good at it or that, you know what I mean? It's she likes it. she wants to help people and she found a different way. Right?
Yeah. No, and passion is what she talks about in that end.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
In the end monologue.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't put it on the beats, but that end monologue, it's a great example of like you put it in the wrong movie, somebody just like stating the lesson of the movie out loud, and it feels really dumb. But here, like the purpose of that scene is for her to like speak a thematic lesson to everyone in the crowd. So it works. Like they found a way that was organically allowed them to like state the lesson. I thought it was like, that was really clever.
On that note, too, I think the last thing I'd want to actually ask you guys is how do you feel about, like, I don't know what you call those end lower thirds that, like, Animal House did and this movie does. How do you feel about that with as far as story goes? Because you are literally, like, telling and not showing. I love them. I'm not saying I don't love them. But it's an interesting writing tactic, too, if you think about it. Because, you know what I mean? You're not showing.
Go ahead, Jamie, and then I'll comment.
I think they're crowd pleasers.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do like them. They enjoy them. And I think if you're into the movie, you enjoy them. If it's like the worst movie you've ever seen and then they put them up, then you're eye rolling them. You know, you're like,
yeah.
They did this for this movie. There's a part of me that I would only do it if I was sending them up in some ways because they've been done so often. Like I'd have a hard time doing them with a straight face, like ironically.
This was 20 years ago, so it's forgivable still then, right?
Yeah. My wife and I always wonder, like, who created that trope? Like, what was the first movie to do that? I'd love to find that out. But
Animal House was certainly the first one that I think people like
associated with. Yeah,
it's definitely the first comedy movie to do that, I think.
Gotcha.
Because I think people were cracking up when they saw it. They thought that was so hilarious to find out what would happen to all the characters.
It's also a place just to throw in more jokes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's to show. I mean, we are talking comedy, so.
And they do that in this one. Like Warner fails, like does not finish with honors, does not become a senator,
girlfriend, and does not have any job prospects.
Does not have any girlfriend, right? Yeah. But I don't want to end on like a downer note with the movie, but like I actually don't like the Emmett proposal thing. I think it diminishes the importance of what she just did. It sort of like pulls it back a little and says like it feels very much like a studio note. Like they tested it.
Yeah.
I love the way they stayed away from the love relationship through the whole thing.
Didn't need it.
To kind of throw it in there, it's like, oh, the only way she can truly feel like a win is if she actually got married.
Exactly.
Still.
The song like, Perfect Day, and then she's got a big ass smile. It's the very last thing that's stated on screen.
It kind of like, betrays it betrays her being on her own and succeeding.
Yes, 100%. So I'm glad you guys agree with me.
It doesn't make the movie bad in any way.
No,
and it sucks that it's just done with some text. It could totally him just staring at her and clapping would be fine. That's absolutely fine. Then you kind of know, hey, maybe they might get together or they were together. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. That's not what this movie's about.
It's not.
And like you said, Jamie, now it's like saying like, okay, well,
she finally got a guy to propose to her.
The only way that she's gonna be a success or happy is to have a man, and that's bullshit. I don't think that's what this movie is saying. And then in the last tag, it's like the last thing.
I think you could do it properly somehow. Like if you wrote it like it's not giving her any worth. It's just that, you know, now she has found someone that truly, you know, appreciates her properly. But it's the way it's done is so it's like a joke. It's like so quick and simple. It's like, I
hate it.
It's not the point. I
hate it.
So would you have preferred a Cannibal Run like blooper reel at the end?
Hey, why not? That would have been great. Them all singing a song like 40-Year-Old Virgin and something about Mary.
Right. Or they
yeah.
all sing like a song with the bend and pop or whatever.
Yeah.
If I ever get to write a movie like this, I think I want to throw all of them in. I want to have the text. I want to throw the Bollywood, and then I want to throw the blooper reel all in. And a post credit scene. I'm gonna just throw them all in. It'll be like a 45-minute last. It'll be like the movie's done, and you're sitting there 45 minutes later.
What's happening?
What is happening here?
It's just all, and it's still text too. There's text while there's more jokes being said. Like you have text on actual dialogue, competing with each other for jokes.
Or maybe that'll be my art film. It'll be a 10-minute long movie, but then there'll be like 90 minutes of that going on in the end. That'll be the story will be told there.
I'm glad I brought that up because that is kind of the one. If I had a criticism, it's that.
Yeah, I don't
one
like it.
Dumb fucking piece of text.
I hate it.
Yeah.
Emmett's going to propose to her
tonight. Yeah.
It's the perfect day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that would bring us to the end of our outline. And I guess my arc is that sometimes you don't always win, but you have friends there to help you along the way.
Yes.
It sounds like a very Kevin Smith kind of character arc in the
end. I feel like we almost don't need to do this, but did you guys want to say anything you learned from watching Legally Blonde again in the probably the first time for all of us in a big handful of years? Jamie, the first time ever, right?
Yes.
What? Go ahead,
I think I'd remember if I had watched all of it before. Like I remember things like the bend and snap, and I kind of remember the opening. I think I probably caught bits and pieces of it over the years, and I've seen a bunch of beat sheets and stuff. But I don't remember the second half of it at all. So in some ways. But anyway, what I would take from it, again, I was so impressed by how much I wanted her to win, that I would almost like to try a flat arc kind of thing like that. I think it's a hard thing to pull off, but I sort of would like to try a script that has a flat arc. It needs the right story to do it. Most stories won't work, but I would almost think that stories wouldn't work like that. But I think this one kind of shows me that not only did they work, but they can work really in an awesome way if you pull them off in the right way.
I'm going to say I learned two things. We don't never say two things, but I'm going to share two things. The first one is I really like revisiting this. I really forgot how little emphasis there is on a single antagonist. And it's like a really unconventional in that way, in that society is the villain. And it's not just with Elle. Like you see the other characters experiencing that same stereotype and working through it. Like Vivian has put herself in a box, and she realizes like Callahan only sees me as a woman in a room to give me coffee, and Paulette grows out of that same stereotyping about her husband as not having as a woman not having agency, that he can just walk all over, that she learns, to overcome that. And it's just it's a great example of putting a face on a society as a villain and telling a story that doesn't have like a main antagonist. And it's a really great example of that. And then the other thing is the flat arc, right? Like in my mind, this is a movie with a character who has like a profound like character arc of growth and change, but really she's a badass when we meet her, and she's just going the wrong way as far as like what she believes her purpose is. And so that was really instructive to me, that you could tell a story where the character doesn't really change, it's more their purpose changes. And so but you feel it, right? Like you feel that change, even though she's still kind of just as strong as she was when we met her. So.
Well, Jimmy just took mine because I was going to say the flat arc thing too. I mean, that was I think revisiting the movie. That's the thing that stood out to me the most. Like I don't think I've watched this movie, I'd say in a decade probably. But that stood out to me just exactly. Maybe it is who also we are as older people. I don't know, but it stood out to me as just how virtuous she was and well formed she is, and I was just like, this actually makes the movie better. She's not her morals aren't challenged, her belief in others aren't challenged. I love that about this movie. So like it actually made it go up in my list of where it probably sat before of like favorite comedies. Like it's something I didn't notice 20 years ago. You know, I would never have. So yeah, that's what I pretty much took away from it. I think that's it. That's everything, right, guys?
Thanks for doing this, guys. Like, I brought this up. I wasn't sure how you guys would be into it, but like, I love this movie. This is one of my favorite comedies, so I appreciate you guys.
You better love it. Your wife loves it.
Well, she's given me an even greater appreciation of it, of course.
I'm joking, of course, also.
She also loved Hereditary, and he didn't like that.
Oh, man, I can imagine that dinner conversation.
Check the archives.
Oh, my God. Yeah, that's like the one episode that Bob and I got at it.
Has Jill seen Hereditary? Did she like it?
No, never. I'm married. I make horror movies, and I married a woman who doesn't like horror, and that's fine.
Amazing. Opposites attract. Paul Abdul taught us that lesson years ago. But I guess we'll see everybody on the 10 Things I Hate About You episode, and then She's All That episode, and whatever.
The Skulls.
Yeah, we're doing nothing but 90s teen movies from now on. So
Ace Ventura 2. All right.
I do it, Jamie. It's really just about I'll do any stupid movie, but it's like when you said Legally Blonde, the first thought in my head was like, are we gonna get Jamie to watch Legally Blonde? That was my first thought. So yeah, I guess that's everything, guys.
All right, thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
You have just listened to Writer's Blockbusters, a screenwriting podcast featuring two professionals and another guy. Available only on Thundergrunt.